we'll open the meeting of the Short-Term Rental Working Group. Because we're a new group, you might not know us all, and usually the boards that meet here have name tags, but we don't. So I'm going to ask each person to introduce herself or himself so that you know who's here. Oh, do we? We're going to do it anyway.
Are we in the right place?
We are. So if we could begin down here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kara Foley.
And you're
I'm
representing?
representing from the realtor perspective.
Thank you.
Erica Capabianco with Foley Lamacchia, also a realtor.
Sri Budrow, Building and Zoning.
Doug Brown from Select Board.
Charlotte Harris, Planning Board.
Scott McGann, Health Agent.
Melinda Tondera, Planning Department.
Jed Cornock, Town Planner.
And I am Maura O'Keefe, Town Council.
Thank you all. On our agenda, we're going to start with public comment, move to discussion, and then the minutes, and then we'll try to adjourn probably about an hour from now. So on public comment, this is your opportunity to speak on something that's not on the agenda. And I don't know if you had a chance to pick up an agenda, they were by the door. But if you have something to say that's not about how other towns regulate, or about our bylaws, or about local reaction to our plan to regulate short-term rentals, now would be your time to say it. If you wish to speak, please go there to the microphone that's arranged for public comment. That's what connects us to FCTV, so that, and to home people. So you need to go there in order to be heard outside this room. Is there anyone who'd like to speak on something not on the agenda? No. Then we can get started. So Melinda is acting as our researcher, and our first topic is how other towns are regulating short-term rental, and she's given us a great deal of information.
Well, I can't take credit for it because I didn't make the chart. Liz in the audience made the chart, Liz Klein. And I just added any other information that I got from the group here that people sent to me. I added it to her chart, so I cannot take credit for that at all.
You printed it.
You printed it.
I printed it, yeah.
Good
Right.
job. Thanks to Liz Klein for
It's
that.
yours. Yeah, thank you very much. How should we go through this so that other people have access to this information? What we wanted to do was find out what other towns are doing. Jed, did you want to comment in on, or Melinda?
Well, I figured if we had any specific questions, I talked to Liz and she said she'd be happy to stand up and kind of point out certain things if you guys had any specific questions about other towns. I do know that the list includes a broad variety around the US where we're more focused on the Cape. So maybe just taking the few Cape or islands, those towns that are on the list and kind of comparing them.
Well, maybe we should just go briefly through the list. And
I
just-
think we should, and I think we should
in
take
there.
Liz up on her offer to take us through the list.
Do you mind?
Liz, if you would?
If you need to, it's right here.
Thank you.
If I could, would you just say how you got started with this research?
Sure. It started on a playground.
Okay.
Talking with some mom friends about a couple of other families that we knew who were losing some housing, and expressing how frustrated we were to hear of friends who had this happen to them where the end of the lease was up and the owner was, the property owner was not renewing the lease because they were maybe selling or pursuing another avenue with the home. And there were 4 of us chatting about it, and we all own our homes and have lived in town, and decided the next day, I texted our little group message and I said, I'm kind of tired of just talking about it on the playground. Do you want to do something? And that was back in November. And so we started meeting, and we've worked with Dave Garrison a little bit through the Affordable Housing Committee. But that's essentially it. It's just a group of moms, and we now have we have one non-mom in our group, our friend Paul here, and so we just wanted to do something to try and help our community.
Well, great. This seems very helpful.
And that resulted in this article in the Enterprise?
Yes.
Right. Thank you. So if you go ahead with what other towns are doing.
Sure. So in this chart here, I tried to look at different aspects of what other communities were doing. The first set of communities are Cape Cod specific communities, and then I went and looked at other places in the United States that have kind of a similar population size, avoiding looking at larger cities because they're not a great model for Falmouth. So looking at what San Francisco did. It's great for San Francisco, doesn't apply. So I tried to coordinate the type of regulation because they fit into different buckets, if you can think of them in that way. So for example, some of the towns that I looked at included Provincetown, Yarmouth, Barnstable, Truro, and Eastham to cover the Cape. So I'm gonna scroll back up here. And so Provincetown, you know, all these communities require, at the very least, for short-term rental to be registered with that community, and it's generally a local and a state registration requirement. They pretty much all charge a registration fee, if not taxes on top of that. Just another couple of general notes. Basically, every community featured also has some general regulations about noise, that you have to make sure that you specify what's happening with trash, that you have enough parking for the short-term rental. And there's also, most of them include some sort of penalty for folks who are found guilty of violating that, where they can not get a short-term rental permit for maybe a period of 1 or 2 years following issues with their rental. So Provincetown, to go off of anything beyond just a registration, they're opting for a per owner cap. So they enacted, and this has been signed by the Attorney General as of April, they have a restriction that a community an individual can only own and operate 2 short-term rentals. And there can be no corporate ownership of short-term rentals, but an LLC may operate a short-term rental if they can prove that every member of that LLC is an actual person. So that language, actually, if you go through and you read the bylaw that was signed by the Attorney General, that text is essentially identical to the text that was adopted by, Truro at their Springtown meeting, and Eastham in their Springtown meeting. Now, those have not been signed off on by the Attorney General, but we could imagine that the language is essentially the same as the Provincetown regulations. Provincetown is also partnering the restriction with an incentive program. So they're partnering with a company, a third-party company called Lease to Locals, which, the company's called Placemate, the program is called Lease to Locals. This got started in ski towns in Colorado, who face a similar but opposite season housing issue. And so those communities said, well, let's try and see if we can incentivize renting to people who live and work in the community as a year-round rental. And so Provincetown is partnering with the same organization. They're gonna take money that is generated from the taxes and the registration fees for short-term rentals and pay homeowners to stop renting short-term and start renting long-term. So homeowners can get, the incentives are based on the community, so the company works with the community. They set the incentives that seem appropriate based on the economics of Provincetown as a community and the community's goals. And so Provincetown is trying, like the stick and the carrot approach. You can only own and operate so many short-term rentals. Also, if you make it a long-term rental, we will make it worth your while, essentially trying to incentivize that. And so Eastham has the same proposal to limit short-term rentals. They do not have an official incentive program in place. In my reading online, I haven't seen discussions of an incentive program at Eastham. Haven't seen that for Truro either. Other communities on the Cape, including Yarmouth and Barnstable, right now are basically just requiring registration with a yearly fee. And so far, there hasn't really been any action in Mashpee or Sandwich or Bourne with respect to these beyond having some sort of registration with the town. Now, I wanted to also include some results. All of the programs that are launching on the Cape are too new to know if they're working, unfortunately for us. But if we looked at communities that are showing, that have been trying this for longer, so I'm just going to scroll down to Nantucket. They've only been at this for a little bit longer than Falmouth. So Nantucket has been in the news quite a bit as far as short-term rentals go. So they require registration. They actually haven't implemented an official cap on short-term rentals on Nantucket, but they did launch the Lease to Locals program, again, partnering with this third-party organization. And Nantucket's a little bit of a special situation because to fund the program, they have private individuals who gave to essentially a pool of money. As you can imagine, on Nantucket, there are individuals who are in a position to do that. And so far, they launched a Lease to Locals program in fall of 2023, and they have since then housed 53 people in 21 units. So 21 housing units. I'm using units because they're not necessarily, I don't know necessarily if they're all homes or if they're a condo. But those 21 units transitioned from renting short-term to long-term, and you have 53 people in homes now where they are confident that that rent is gonna, that lease will be available to them in subsequent years. If anyone has a question too, I can pause.
I would just comment, I think that you're referring to the Vail Indeed, was the name of the program that they use in Vail, Colorado, for the year-round occupancy of properties?
Maybe. Some of the different ski communities use different names, like Truckee has a different name for it, but it's a similar idea.
Yeah. So Provincetown is the only town so far that's actually adopted that.
On the Cape, yes.
But we have talked about it here.
We have, I think as a way of going forward, I want to be sure that everyone has a chance to question and comment. So I think we'll take questions first from the board, then from the public, and then comments. So let's do questions and then comments, because Liz has done a lot of research. Thank you, and we ought to dig out everything she's got. Any questions here? Questions from you? Yes, please. No, if you're going to speak, please
trade
come
spots
to the
or-
microphone. Thank you, and give your name.
I'm Brett Smith. The question was, if you have two short-term leases, you end up doing one long-term, can you get another, buy a property to do another short-term lease?
Yes.
Okay.
The way that, again, the way that other communities have done that, yes. The thing is that the rules about all of that are set community to community.
And I would just make one comment about Provincetown, where they capped it. They did grandfather in anyone who currently had more than one registered. So anyone who had 3 or 4, they were grandfathered in. So, but then going forward, from the time that they signed, it's 2 only.
Yeah.
I would like to add a comment to that. Grandfathering turned out to be a real problem in Nantucket around corporations, I think. So that if the original proposal brought forward for their regulating bylaw was that the corporations that were already using short-term rentals and had several of them, they could stay, but they would be capped, there wouldn't be more of them. And people felt, particularly one individual, felt that was really unfair, that people going forward were denied an opportunity that the ones who got in early had, and they ought to reconsider it. So they put off passing their bylaw for until another town meeting, when in fact they ended corporate ownership of short-term rentals, so that grandfathering in itself, who are you going to grandfather, under what conditions? It will come up, I'm sure, here, because many people in Falmouth already do count on income from short-term rentals. Yeah. Other comments on what the information Liz has presented?
I think it's good. I think Falmouth does have a little bit of regulations. I mean, we're supposed to register any rental, so there is a registration requirement, whether it's short-term or long-term.
So I would make a comment on that as well. I noticed that a lot of the towns have raised their registration fees significantly. I mean, I think is our 75, is Falmouth 75 or 50?
For about, well, let's see, I came to town in 2002. It was 25. It was 25 until last year. I doubled it to 50, but that's it. So it was always $25 forever and a day, and now it's 50 per unit. Then it's 25 for a place that might have 20 units. Let's say it's an apartment complex, it would
Do we
be.
have any idea what, do we know how much comes into the town as far as revenue from the short-term rental registration?
I don't have it with me. I can give you a rough number.
I think it was like 1.3.
Yeah, it was
In terms of,
1.3.
I thought you meant from our rental, the health department rental only?
Well,
Or
I mean, the registrations, because I was
just the
talk-
registrations at the health
Yeah.
department? Not a lot.
'cause I know, I think Provincetown, I think they had 5 million come in last year, which all went to attainable.
Yeah, so we're in the low probably 10, 20, 15,000, somewhere in there, because we're not, again, I think they went to the outside third-party companies in order to find where they are.
Did.
And that, when you bring that much in, multiplied by whatever their fee is, is that $750 was their fee?
$750.
So if we went something like that, that $750 would have to go to pay for, these short-term rental companies would charge
Yeah,
X.
the Granicus.
The Granicus's of the world, GovOS, those types of companies. Let's say they want, if they wanted 200, I don't know, making up numbers, I don't know. If they wanted $200,000 a year to help you manage short-term rentals, and you brought in 5, well, then you brought in more money, right? So, yeah, you'd have to make the fee go up to commiserate with what's going on with the company and what they're charging, right? So, right now, we just do it internally. When they apply, we process them, and that's it, so.
I think we're going to have to research the amount because a different figure is presented in a different form, yes.
Just in regards to the enforcement and whatnot.
Just please give your name.
Oh, sorry, Martina Khan. Having spoken with various people within the Falmouth Town Hall, that it's my understanding that we have already paid as a town for some sort of computer program this past year that can pinpoint and find out the address of all these people. And
The Granicus is what
yes,
does
so
that,
it already
yeah.
exists, is my understanding, within the town. I think it's more to the point of enforcement. And because I think at the last meeting, we determined there was maybe 1,000 something that are actually registered, and Liz pointed out it's in the several thousand. So there's at least 75% of the homes renting out. And I went on VRB, there are thousands upon thousands of people who are renting out their homes. And I think what it is too, my own suggestion is that every year you send out like tax bills, in there somewhere you say you need to register. And because people are claiming they don't know. But if you send it out on the tax bill as a sheet, then every single homeowner is aware that this exists, and that gives you the ability to enforce this more than what's already being done. Because from what I have been told by people within Town Hall, there is no enforcement. There's no enforcement, and if you send a letter, there's no one and saying you're gonna get fined. No one is collecting these fines. So that is something I believe that already it exists, and it needs to be addressed as it is.
That point was well enforced. It was raised and enforced at our first meeting.
Yes, so, but it's just, that's something
Staffing.
else.
Scott, did you want to comment?
Well, we haven't, the third-party company that would find the rentals like the Granicus, the town has not hired anyone at this point. They're interviewing
And
entities that do that. So at this point, the town hasn't hired anyone to do that yet. They're interviewing companies looking at the collection of that.
And I did a webinar with the Granicus people, and they actually said that they would come here and do the tally of how many are in town without any fee.
Yeah, they'll give you a raw number,
Yeah.
yes. But we're looking for a company that's going to help manage it, send out the bills, do that kind of thing, and not just generate a list. There's companies, GovOS, we met with last week, the town manager, myself, and Jed. Was it last week?
Yeah.
And so we're in the process of finding one, and then that would then it would be, from up to my town manager's office on who they chose. And then from there, yes, you would be able to capture the thousands, and then, but you got to build in a system on how you're going, okay, so you have a list, and how is that going to go out? So like GovOS will, and I'm sure Granicus will too, I'm just using GovOS because it's the one I'm most familiar with, will do the registration and do a lot of the background heavy lifting type of things in order to get the revenue in and issue permits. So there's different levels at which you can purchase. It could be simply like more like a list of the units updated routinely as they get added and subtracted to the websites. And some take more proactive. There's some that have third parties that'll actually come out and help you with the enforcement part. So you have to kind of look into that. How does that happen? So, yeah, so the town's looking into it, but they haven't found one yet or actually have purchased from anyone at this point in time. But
Is the town also researching staffing to do the enforcement?
well, I think it's going to depend on how much you can get out of, let's say you choose GovOS, as for example. So how much are they going to be able to do? And we'll have to pick up the differential. So how many people I would need is, if I was just getting a list, I might need 5 people. I don't know, right? Because there's several thousand a year. If we're doing, how often do we want to, this is something we have to figure out. How often do we do inspections? How many inspections can a person do in a day? Plus re-inspections. I would say probably 6 to 8 inspections per day. And if you've got to do 3,000 a year, well, that's going to be quite a bit of staff, right? So it all depends on what levels we want to do other than just capturing them. So it's one thing to capture them. You can build them. But you also need, if we're going to do it annually, or you're going to do it every 5 years, that all stuff just still needs to be determined. And, what the outcome comes from here will help determine what direction we want to go in, So I think more of the complaint end would be more on our end, right? So we're the enforcement. So that's where we're at. So.
I don't know, do we really want to get into starting to try to go out and investigate and inspect every house? I don't know if that's practical.
No, but we do complaints, and then we get into, like we talked about last time, is what can we do as a town entity to go out and actually try to determine what's going on and if there is a violation. There's some limitations to what we can do, and we talked about that last time. So all that still needs to be sort of figured out. It's a big
But much of the
thing.
information that Melinda has managed to accumulate points out that several of the communities have built in an enforcement mechanism. It's interesting. It came out in the first hearing that we held a month ago that these short-term rentals are really completely unsupervised small hotels. There's nobody there enforcing anything. The host isn't there, nobody's there. So if you go to try to find out who was there, you don't know. There's no way of registering the guests. There's no way of following up with the people who caused problems, any of that. What I noticed in the material that was pulled together by Liz and given to us is that several of the towns have said they have to be hosted. You have to identify a local person who can be contacted and be there to come and deal with it, or it has to be a hosted situation. And that's the rationale for making it owner-occupied. They're right there, or some towns apparently are limiting it to owners can own 2 and be counted in that language as the host for them, so that there's a responsible person there while the guests are there, and you can then attend to it. And that would be one of the main enforcements. It would be more nearly like a hotel-motel situation where there's a clerk at the desk. So that rather than having to completely staff up for troubleshooting, you've got a person there.
Or at least somebody that's a responsible person to answer a phone.
To answer a
I
phone,
don't think they
to
can
either
really-
be on site or go over and see what's happening.
I
Call
don't think
the
we can
police if
have them
necessary.
be on site because, it just doesn't seem practical. with it.
Some of them are homes.
Well, owner-occupied is on site, you would hope. That's why it's owner-occupied.
But
Well, if
not
they're
when it's
renting out
renting.
the house, then they need somebody that is available by phone.
If it's a VRBO so that you're getting the whole house,
Yeah.
then you would need somebody nearby who's
Right.
going to be the local representative.
And I think a lot of that depends on how they're managed. If it's professionally managed, where you have a management company that is, they're the ones that are the face of the rentals. So like, if you have a management company, then there's a problem, they're gonna call that management company and it's gonna get addressed. But I think some of the issues are when people are just renting on their own and they're just putting them out there, they want 2 or 3 weeks a season, but they wanna use the rest of it for themselves. They're just throwing it out on VRBO. and they're not accessible when there's a problem. So I think it depends on the platform that people are using as well for these rentals.
Yeah. I think what we need to do is make a set of parameters that they have to operate within. One of them
Right.
would be that there needs to be a responsible person who will answer the phone
And is local.
and
I
is
know-
local and can respond when there's incidents.
But to that point, it would have to be registered somewhere.
Right.
So the registration process probably maybe needs to come first.
That's right.
So then there's an owner attached to that registration, and if they're non-responsive, then, maybe like they were saying in some other towns, you don't get to register for another year, or whatever it is, fines.
Right.
Hi, sorry, just about the idea of having the people who are renting someone to contact, but I think a lot of the problem is the neighbors who have issues. How are we going to know who to call when our neighbor is renting out their two-bedroom home to 50 people? We need to have somebody that we can contact, and that's, I know the town of Barnstable has an overnight number, and they have a daytime number that they call within the town, and maybe it's not addressed until business hours, but there's somebody who is there, because for all the thousands of numbers, if you have all these neighbors, how am I going to track down who they're renting through? Because there's so many different rental sites that you don't know what the number is. So if we have a town number, then it makes it easier for us to be able to contact somebody.
Yep, I agree.
Thank you.
I agree. What's the reaction of others?
We do have complaint forms on the town website for any issues. And the complaint forms come to our department, and if it's something like that has to do with the home and the people living there, what's going on, it is turned over to the Board of Health, and both the building and Board of Health are looking into it. So there is, on the town website, complaint forms where you can complain. And we get it the next day or during that same day.
Well, that would be a problem on weekends.
Sorry, we have complained multiple times, and it's never been addressed. We've had meetings all the way up to the town manager about the fact that it isn't being addressed. So that's why we're coming to these meetings, because it has to be addressed, and it's not being addressed. And because apparently it's the health department, there's not enough people in the health department to address it. So the complaints are being taken, and they're being acknowledged, but then there's nothing to be done after the complaints are taken. So that's why something needs.
I think you made that
If I may.
point very strongly at our last meeting.
Yes.
So we're already aware that that's an issue?
Yeah.
Particularly on weekends, you were saying?
Yes.
There's nobody to answer the phone?
Yes.
Nighttime, and even then, Scott had added to that, those people are gone. So that we need a
yes.
guest registry. I mean, we're keeping track as you go along so that you won't have to keep telling us, so.
But I just want to the point that was made about the forms are there, but then they can't follow up on it, so that's something that,
Well, I would respectfully disagree that we did not follow up. What I could not do is determine that there was a violation by standing at the street. That's sort of the limitation of being at the property
Yes.
line.
Exactly.
So it wasn't that we didn't give time or effort or we ignored you, is we did go out there. The issue is that we didn't do anything in terms of seeing anything that we could actually write up as a violation. We can't count cars and do different things to determine whether there was a violation. So a lot of these things, and I've been reading through them, they don't say anything about what to do if you find a violation.
Right.
So that's where,
Agreed.
that's the most important thing to me, is how am I going to make a determination that there's a
agreed,
violation?
because there isn't really anything for you to do. And
Yeah.
so this is what everyone is here to do.
Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, at the back?
I was just wondering if there's, Jamie Edwards with Kinlan Grover. I was wondering if there's just some way on the registration form that you could have that contact person that has to be available if the property is rented. And that way, if somebody calls, then they have a contact person.
That's part of their application, yeah.
Yes.
That's already on there.
But why can't somebody just call that person and
We
say?
do.
Oh, okay. All right, I didn't know.
But let's say this is a foodborne illness. You own a restaurant, and I got a complaint of salmonella. I don't just call you up. I got to evaluate the restaurant and do the inspection. So when someone calls, if it's a neighbor calling on another neighbor, I can only see what I can see, and that's where sort of the trouble is with the enforcement part of it.
but-
Whereas a restaurant, I can go in and take my thermometer and probe everything and check everything out. It's a little different with a home. So that we do get the call, we would follow up, may or may not be to the satisfaction of anybody who called. That's just sort of been what the reality is. It's not that we would ignore it.
I guess I'm suggesting this only because it would relieve some of the responsibility from you. And there'd be a phone number that even the tenant or the neighbor could call and say, so-and-so, there's a problem over at the house, you need to get over it. And that would relieve the responsibility from you. Like, I work at Kinlan Grover, I get calls all the time from a neighbor or from somebody that says, you need to go over and check this property. So we just get in our car and we go over and check it. If there's if they, they just, this is not saying anything about you, this is just saying throw the responsibility on the owner. You have to have a property manager available for a tenant or a neighbor to call.
So I would suggest we consider having a listing of all these short-term rentals on the town website with the phone number that is listed for that rental.
That's a good idea.
Well, I think it's already I just have to check on how our software, you can look up, you might be able to do it now, but it might just be something on Permitize that we could
It should be a
change.
separate page just for short-term rental management. And
Yep.
then the neighbor says, geez, there's a party going on at a certain address. Go on the town's website, look up that address and see who's the responsible contact number.
True.
Call them directly.
But I think this is getting,
This goes back to having it registered.
Right.
Right.
yeah, so that'll work. I
That's what I
think,
was saying, some of them that you guys have.
I think the bigger issue is we're not capturing 99% of them, so it's irrelevant now, right? We're only capturing small amounts of it. So I think at first you have to capture them as you build your system in order to, so the first step is to capture them. Find the companies that help us capture them, make the fee appropriate to the company's charge on us, find out who they are, get them registered, deal with the complaints. We'll have to figure out how we're going to deal with the complaints and how we can evaluate complaints. It's a little tricky. They are homes. So I think the first is you got to find them. Yes,
I'm
their
not saying
application now, but their application now does have the name and contact owner that has to be posted at the premises for any rental.
Yeah, we
So
tell
that usually
everybody
it's
to.
inside a kitchen cabinet. If you have issues, you contact this number. The permit itself is public record. Whether it's viewable easily is another question. We'd have to look at that, but I don't think that's a heavy lift to make it. Now, once you build in this GovOS or this Granicus, that's going to be an open sort of form, and anybody could, you would build in sort of what I call a public view end of it. You can do that. It's just, we got to find the company and the one that works best for us.
Well, I'm not saying what to do in what order. I'm just saying
Yeah.
that that's one way that
I
direct.
think reviewing the
line-
registration process is going to be a big part of working this out. And we know that there are issues with it, and until we have a proposal to react to, we're not really building on what we already know. So let's not react defensively, let's just realize that we need a very thorough registration process tied to the state, that's local, and when we have it, we'll have a review of it. So I think, did you want to speak about registration or something?
No, I just wanted to make a comment about what you're talking about.
Please come.
Hi, my name is Susan Kelleher. I'm with Kingland Grover also, but I'm not here representing them or anything. I'm an Airbnb host, and I just wanted, I just am cautious. I would like you to be cautious about what you're doing, because my husband has lived in this town all of his life, and we rented his mom's house out. She did. And we had a tenant there. She had a tenant for 30 years that stayed in that house. And that person passed away, and then they rented it to her son for 3 years. And in the 3 years' time, he destroyed that house to the tune of $150,000 worth of repairs. And the time that we were alerted was by the neighbors, who wrote a letter to us and sent it to us, telling us to please see this. But when my mother-in-law would go for her yearly visit, it was all the way it was supposed to be. And so the only way that we were able to get that person out was to give them money in order to get them to leave. And then my husband went ahead and renovated that house. And as I said, it cost $150,000. And she didn't want to rent it again. Now, she's in her 90s. She's 98. She lives in Florida now, and she lives part-time here, but can't make the trip anymore. So we started Airbnb in it. And so I'm an Airbnb host. But what I want to say is that we got a letter from someone that was renting it year-round. There's no difference between your year-round renter troublemaker and your Airbnb troublemaker. They're the same. The only big difference is it took us $5,000 to get him out, and that person's gone in 3 days or 5 days or 7 days, whatever it is. And we've been doing it for a very long time, I think 3 years at that house, and we've never had an issue to date, knock on wood, I guess, with the people that stay at our house, and our neighbors tell us that they like it better. The house isn't occupied all the time. It's sometimes occupied, and the people have been nice. So I don't think this is black and white, and I don't think that you can say it's all Airbnb and all VRB's fault. People have been renting in this town. My husband said they used to have 16 houses they rented when he was a kid. So rentals have been going on forever. And they had parties, and they did all the things that you don't like people to do. But I just don't think limiting or saying you can't have a short-term rental is your answer. Another comment I'll make is that I was the director of sales for Vacation and Properties here in Falmouth, and they owned the Surfside Beach and Park Beach Motel. And that was over 200 rooms. I think it was 250, if my memory is correct. And they took those hotel rooms out of the offering to people visiting our community, our tourist-centered community. So those people had to find another place to go to. And that's how Airbnb and VRBO, I guess, got started. Now, I don't do VRBO, we just do Airbnb. We do short-term, we don't require a 7-night stay. We find they come in, they leave, my husband goes there and inspects before they get there, and he inspects when they leave, and he tells me every time, it looks exactly the same as when they got there.
We're not doing this because we're afraid that houses are being destroyed. We're doing it because.
But how are you gonna manage inspection and,
Well, we're just getting started
you
here.
know, I know, but that's what I'm saying. I mean, it feels to me like you're flagging.
Well, could I ask you a question?
Yes, it feels to me though that you're flagging
To sum up what
Airbnb
you're
or
saying,
short-term as bad.
Are you saying you don't want to see short-term rentals regulated further by the town? Is that your point?
I don't think that they should be, this is someone's home that they own, and they have a right to do with it what they want to do with it. And if they rent it to a year-round tenant that is trouble for that neighbor, they'll be just as mad as they are when it's a one-week person.
I understand your
There's a lot
point.
of chatter in the town, and people think this is a way to abolish rentals, short-term rentals. So I think the stigma of this meeting is we're trying to do away with it, and that's why we're sitting here, because we don't want to do away with it. So I
Well, I
totally,
feel
yeah.
like that is what it is.
That's, well,
It's definitely not what it is.
yeah, it's not what it is, because a lot of my business comes from it, so we're here to support it.
Yeah.
We don't have really, I don't think we've given opinions on where we're pro or con yet. I think we're just trying to figure out a way to police it, right?
And I think
Well,
the
let-
most
enforce it.
important thing that I'm trying to get across, though, is that
Just
the
a moment,
person-
please. Let's make it more orderly. We'll take turns speaking. It's not a conversation. It's actually a hearing where we have some rules to it. I think it would be useful to poll the board and see if there's anyone here on this working group who wants to abolish short-term rentals. If you do, raise your hand. No, it's not what we're doing. It's not what we're doing.
The reason
Don't
that we've
intend to do
assembled
it.
this is because if you look at the court rulings that are going on right now, that's defaulting to either you're in a business zone or you're not. And it's already been determined by courts, it's a business use. So if we don't put some kind of parameters around it and make some regulations and some enforcement, it might just default to no use other than in a
Yeah,
business
so
zone.
why am I under the impression that you want to, what you want to do is increase housing for the year-round resident? Isn't that how this subject started
We
tonight?
haven't gotten that far yet. There are people in the audience that would love to see that happen, but
Isn't that what that presentation was talking about?
we have to be fair and let everybody talk. So you're absolutely right on that one.
That presentation is showing what other towns are doing or not doing.
But the goal of that person is, from what she said, of being in the playground and talking to people that couldn't get housing, was that they eliminated X amount of short-term rentals and made them into year-round housing.
I think you shouldn't make an assumption about someone else's motivation. That isn't what their motivation was, as I understand it, and I think we should
I
avoid
think it was more of
trying
an
to do that.
observation that it was happening, and it
Okay.
was raised a concern that we should know better what we're doing and what we have in town. At our first meeting, it seemed likely that we have more short-term rentals than year-round rentals. Maybe we just need to know what the playing field is, and then we'll decide how to proceed.
When I came to this town 37 years ago, I couldn't find a place to rent either. All there were summer rentals and winter rentals. You had to move from one to the other 37 years ago, when I came to town.
Oh.
So I don't think it's a new problem our town is having. I think it's a repeating problem our town is having, like every town in America.
If you want me to share a little quick story, my mom was a school teacher and a single parent, and we used to rent, we had 2 little cottages, and we would rent one or the other, depending if they wanted the bigger one or the smaller one. And if we got lucky and somebody wanted both, we'd get in the VW camper and go to the campground.
Yeah,
And so we've always rented, and I still have one of those cottages, and it's on Airbnb.
yeah.
So we're not trying to eliminate them, we're just
My
trying to
husband
make
used
sure
to
we
summer
got
in
a handle on it.
Comet.
All right?
All right, that's enough for me.
Thank you.
Liz, did you have more in your presentation? I see you're waiting there.
Well, I just wanted to, first of all, let Susan know that eliminating Airbnbs is not our group's intention. And we are hoping that to increase long-term rental housing, because we all recognize the importance of tourists to our community. I teach in town. I know that the public schools benefit from the tourism economy. I know that I directly benefit from that. And so want to preserve that, but also see friends who are making an amount of money that they should theoretically be able to afford to rent somewhere, and they cannot find a place. And so we're trying to change that game. And our group is really interested in incentivizing renting long-term so that it is not necessarily through a penalty. Now, the other thing I just wanted to mention is the only model I mentioned so far was the per owner cap. That's only one of the strategies. Some other strategies that different communities have used to try and tackle if housing is available short-term or long-term or otherwise is through zoning. So some towns have done it through zoning, that short-term rentals are allowed in certain parts of the town and then not in other parts of the town is another strategy. There are also some towns that have adopted a maximum number of nights per year that a rental can be rented for. And that number in those communities is sometimes different. If the owner lives in the town, then it can be rented for more nights, or lives in the unit, then it can be rented for more nights. If they don't live in the unit, then it can be rented for fewer nights of the year. And then there's also some towns, the other big strategy, other than a per owner cap, is to limit the total number of permits or short-term rental licenses for the community. So like, for example, some of the towns in Colorado, I'm just gonna see, sorry. Like in El Dorado County, for example, which is a mountain town in California, they have a limited number of permits overall. So the entire county, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but there's only so many allowed in the county, and if you aren't on the list, you're on the wait list. And then the permit doesn't transfer when the property changes ownership. So that's when a person could come off of the wait list and join the short-term rental list. So that's just another strategy. The per owner cap is a more common strategy.
Thanks for all your research. Very helpful.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak and has a new point to make? Okay, let's move on then. We were going to look at the Falmouth zoning bylaw review. Commercial accommodations seems to be where this would fall. And in the court findings in the Linfield case and again in Nantucket, it's found short-term rentals are a commercial use that doesn't belong in a residential district. And that's how the state is coming down on it. So we'd, taking a look at our commercial accommodation rule. Jed, do you want to explain what that rule is?
Sure can. So commercial accommodations is an umbrella term in our zoning bylaw that allows for items such as lodging houses, boarding houses, hotels, motels, etc. Essentially, it's a broad zoning bylaw section that allows for a certain number of rooms based on the lot size of the property. And so, as long as a property owner is in a specific zoning district, which it's allowed through special permit, has a certain size lot that can allow for a certain number of units, they could apply to the zoning board of appeals for a special permit to do so. The calculation is included in the zoning bylaw. I'm not going to go through it. It's somewhat complicated, but the basic premise here is that that is the zoning code, or the section of the zoning code that would allow for a rental property for transient guests, which is essentially what a short-term rental situation is, because those guests are transient in nature. Is it specific to a short-term rental zoning bylaw? Not quite, in my opinion, but it's close. It's the closest thing we have in the zoning bylaw.
And where are commercial accommodations allowed in Falmouth?
Yeah, excellent question. So they're allowed in just about every zoning district. They're in the agricultural, the single residence, the business districts, light industrial, and the public use. So it leaves out 2 zoning districts, which are the Marine District and currently the Senior Care Retirement District. So essentially, in every one of those districts, which I will clarify in just one second, it's allowed by special permit. Now, clarification, in light industrial districts, there are 2 areas, light industrial B and light industrial C, where they're not allowed at all. Those are generally, light industrial B is the tech park, and light industrial C is generally for contractors' yards. Very small districts throughout the town. But for the most part, they're allowed by special permit just about everywhere.
In all the residential districts?
That's correct, yep. So single residence, double A, single A, B, C, and general residence.
And actually, if we think about Falmouth, we can find examples of them in all those areas, motels
Correct.
mostly, or old inns.
Yep.
Right, so it was possible.
Yep, and there's approximately 40 or so special permits that have been issued throughout history of the town for commercial accommodations. And again, it's inns, bed and breakfasts, motels, hotels, be like.
Okay, so really what's happened is that business went online, and it's possible right now in Falmouth to have it everywhere.
Through a special permit, yes, which I think is really important to emphasize. A special permit is, for those of you who don't know, it's a discretionary permit issued by the Zoning Board of Appeals. So if a property owner is not demonstrating that they can accommodate a commercial accommodation on their property, they would not just necessarily get to operate one. They would have to receive the special permit from the Zoning Board of Appeals. So they basically have to prove they've got enough area, they're not gonna have impact on the neighbors, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of the research that we've done internally on the commercial accommodation special permits that have been issued in our history have mostly been issued in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So it's been a long time since the last commercial accommodation was issued. In fact, I think the last one we found was 2004. So they've all sort of been here
No,
already.
I did 2 in the 15 years I was here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's-
Doug?
Is your inclination to suggest that we should modify the commercial accommodations to accept this, or I was thinking it would be a whole new permit, and I wasn't really thinking a special permit, but just a permit by right under the conditions that we come up with.
Right, so there's pros and cons, right? So, a con with going that route is that, based on the projected number of short-term rentals that we have, maybe, say it's 3,000. That's 3,000 new special permits that you're putting through the Zoning Board of Appeals process.
Yeah, that's tough.
Which is an awful lot of work, and it may not result in a whole lot of end results that we want, right? The pro is that, well, there's a zoning bylaw that would, sort of help a public process in regulating it, because you could develop rules around that. So I don't know that I would recommend doing it in that way, but, there's also Board of Health regulations that could help regulate in perhaps a better fashion renters and allow for that quick turnover, because, you know, there could be circumstances where people are trying to do a short-term rental quickly, and they're trying to get through the process quickly, open it up for rental purposes, and going through a public process with the zoning board of appeals is the last thing. It's not a quick process.
Right. It's not practical to think that the ZBA could handle all that. They're busy enough already.
There's that too, absolutely.
Have the real estate people thought of the practical way to do it here?
Say that again?
Have the real estate people talked among themselves about what would be the most practical way to regulate short-term rentals for Falmouth? I think the concern is to have large corporations come in and be too much of a presence in any neighborhood. So that's really what, the whole business is in transition, and we're trying to get ahead of that curve. And I wonder if the real estate agents themselves have spoken about this and come up with something.
I don't think they've necessarily come up with something. There's been a lot of talk about it, because I think this is, you know, it's kind of in its infancy right now, and I don't know that there's been enough study done as to how many rentals we have, what the income potential is, how that would help. But as far as the short terms and worrying about corporations coming in, I mean, it would make sense to maybe cap how many could be registered and what type could be registered with the town. But, you know, I think we probably need more input from the real estate community on that. And we've talked about it a little bit in our MLS tour and things like that. So I think people are starting to talk about it more. But, you know, I don't think there's a consensus at this point.
I think it just started with the work group and
Yeah.
the hum around town with it.
Right.
But I don't know, are you concerned about corporations that already own properties or corporations coming in and buying properties?
Both.
Both.
Have
'Cause
we seen that?
I think our price point in Falmouth, I don't think corporations are acquiring anything yet. I haven't seen a lot of them. I know Nantucket is having that issue with that one gentleman that's selling everything off now.
Yeah.
But I don't know of anybody, do you know of anybody locally that is doing this?
Not locally, but I took a trip to, which I
Yes.
talked about in
Yeah.
the last meeting, I took a trip down to Maryland to, where the, one of the Civil War, a lot of grave sites and battlegrounds, so it's a tourist town in that way.
Yep, yeah.
And there was hundreds under the same ownership.
And then there's the fractional ownership that could potentially be an issue, because the fractional ownership is people can put their money into a pool and own several different properties. So
Right.
fractional ownership, maybe you might need to think about that. Like, do you want to allow properties that are fractional ownership to be registered? Or do you stick with the individuals who can say, yep, I'm a property owner, you know? I don't know what the number is. Is it 2? Is it 3? I don't know what that number is. But I feel like in some ways, we put the cart before the horse, because we haven't done a study.
Right.
There's not been these other towns have paid to have studies done, and they know what they're dealing with. So I feel like we don't really know what we're dealing with, because we don't really know how many short-term rentals there are. And if we were to register these rentals, get a handle on it, then where does that money go? How much, you know, money can come into the town? When you're talking about Provincetown bringing in $5 million in a
We're not
year,
doing that,
that they can
yeah.
put towards, you know, whether it's the software, or they can put it towards, you know, staffing and things like that. But, you know, at $50 a registration, it's not gonna, you know, the short-term rent. But I think we need to get a handle on what is going on, how many rentals we have, how many are registered, how many aren't. How many are strictly short-term, or how many are, you know, grandma who, you know, just wants to supplement her income, or somebody who buys a short-term property and only rents it out for 2 weeks of the summer. And so they wouldn't even be eligible for a long-term, because they're still using it themselves. So I think we need to get a handle on what the atmosphere is.
I agree with that, and Granicus said that they would do that.
They would do that with no charge for the initial meeting. They would come prepared with the numbers to come to one of our
When
meetings.
can they do that?
As soon as we invite them. I don't know if it is problematic for the bidding, the town,
Right.
when you're hiring, you have to be fair to all parties.
Yeah,
It might be prejudicial if we invite one of the potential bidders to come and bring us some free information, because it might bias us towards them. That's the reason I mentioned it last time, but not pushed it.
Right. Yeah, it's a challenging subject, clearly. I think understanding that we have a good amount perhaps can be a starting point for that conversation, because I think we're all pretty confident that there's a good amount of short-term rentals. And so I think we could start talking about, well, what are the problems that we know of, right? And where do you want to land in terms of getting them registered, creating an environment where you can, I hate to use the word police it, but enforce, the rules, and what are some of the rules that, we're hearing from the public that are important? Because I do think that there were some elements that were brought up today that are brand new to the conversation, which, we've talked about briefly, but we really haven't gotten any input, except for, I think, maybe one person, the whole idea of capping. Is that something that is worthwhile of discussing, right? So I think, I'm not sure that we need to know the exact number, but why not start talking about some of the things that are important to us? I think, as an example, parking. I think everyone knows that, when you have a short-term rental, making sure that everybody can park on their property and not on the street, not on the neighbors' yards, not down the street, etc. Noise. Folks are concerned about noise and impacts to the neighborhood, trash removal, those types of things that are, I think, easy to discuss and then later on put into either a zoning bylaw amendment or a regulation through.
The other thing maybe too is the minimum night stay, because if you get, I think somebody was talking about it at the last meeting, if you get someone in for one night and, some of these online platforms, as you get closer to the night, it gets less and less expensive to rent. So, it's $100 a night, a bunch of college kids come and rent it for the night. It's one night, they're gone the next day, you can't, they're gone.
Right.
So do you go to a 4 or 7 night minimum? I don't know what the answer is, but that might help.
I think discussing each of the possibilities for limitation is important, but I really hope that we will be able to get the data, get a survey going soon, so that we have that foundation under us when we try to move forward and decide on where to place the limits, what to place the limits on, and so forth, because the types of ownership matter, the limits on numbers of people who can be in the house at a single time, rules that Scott already has, and see how many do apply and how many have to be extended. But it would begin, I agree, with the data. We just really need those facts. And if it's true that we need to put it to a bid, is that true?
Well, I guess the question is, so if we find out that there are 3,000 short-term rentals, and let's say someone says, well, no, I think there's 1,000, what's the difference? We know that there's a good amount of them, so we still need to
I'll tell you an
form.
answer, and there may be other answers that are more complete. One of the differences is how much revenue can you raise from this without killing that particular section of the industry? Because it's from the revenue that you raise from it that you're going to be able to staff it and police it, regulate it.
Yeah.
Totally
So
fair.
you need to know.
Yeah.
The numbers matter.
But the registration fee is something, I think, outside of it. We know we want to register them. I mean, I think we can decide the fee down the road if the
We
group
can,
or
if
the-
we have a handle on the numbers, and I don't see why we would delay, why the town of Falmouth would delay in trying to get that information.
Well, and Provincetown did the study, that they're talking about. I have a copy for you guys of the study that they did through the Donahue Institute at UMass Amherst. So they actually, and I think it was relatively costly for them to do this, but they got a real handle on the numbers before they started to regulate. I don't know if there's another way to do that without having to go through something like this.
So we're gonna have an in-person meeting with GovOS. We've already had 2 meetings with them. So that's with the town manager to figure out what the best company is, get the bids in, pick the best one. What that costs, that's up to, I'm not an accountant, or that's not my area. and then choose the best one, and then we get the list and all of them, and they all do it a little different way on how they figure out, and what they're going to do for you is that, you know, they can go as cheap as giving you the list and you run with it, or it could be more like, we're actually going to send the bills out, and we're going to give the policies out, and we're going to make the phone calls, and there's a complaint line. Like you mentioned before, there's a complaint line with some of these companies. But it takes a while to go through and find the best one. That's what we've been doing. You know, there's also third parties off of GovOS that will actually start doing more boots on the ground type of thing. So we have to see whether we want this option. You know, it's like anything else. It's a la carte, right? So once you purchase that, do you want X? Do you want Y? So, you know, let's say for example, we choose GovOS, and it's 1-800-GovOS, and then complaints would be there. And if they can handle the complaints, they will. Then ones they can't handle would be forwarded to us. That's kind of what we would be looking at. And I think that should happen separately from here, because you're going to get bogged down with the presentations, because I think we've spent 3 hours with GovOS, and we haven't even cracked open everything that they can do. So it's an involved process to figure out what exactly they can offer us. So that ball's already starting to roll. Right, but
It's good to know that, but it sounds as if it's a much bigger ball than what we're discussing. What we're discussing is finding out how many are here, just getting ground level information.
Is it worth talking to the other towns who have already gone through this process and saying, who do you like, who, you know, figuring out how they got through this process and who they liked, and what was effective and what wasn't, then you're not necessarily recreating the wheel. I'm sure every town is different, so I'm not saying that what they did was what we should do, but at least some of the research has been done.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we are hoping that will happen.
I guess we got a couple of decisions to make. We could take, if you want me to, I can reach back out to the people who I did the online seminar with, and say, I'd like to take you up on your offer. They said it was no obligation. They'd be happy to come to one of our meetings. Just explain.
so then you're doing, in my opinion, you're kind of doing two different things it's the same thing in different avenues. So Jed, myself, Peter, and Mike are working at GovOS, and then you have a presentation to hear with another group. That really should be done with the same body to make so you could say, hey, we love Granicus, and we're out working something with GovOS. It seems like that all should happen internally or happen here. You could have a presentation, but sort of looking at the nuts and the bolts really should probably be where we've been looking at the other company already. Does that make sense?
Well, if it does, then we'll let you do that, and let's focus ourselves on what would the regulations be.
That's would be my
And
opinion.
we could develop those and not waste our time wondering.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. I see, that's the way I think. You should be working on the regulation. We'll be working, you know, like Jed said, if it's 2,300 or 3,300, you know, that's probably somewhere in the ball, probably right there between 2,200 and 3, somewhere in there. But yeah, I think we need to do two different things. Like if you're trying to look and research and find the best one and then recommend it, and they're, you know.
That's not what
I'm
we
not
said.
recommending.
No, I meant by
We're saying
doing the
that.
presentation. I meant by having the
I
presentation.
just thought it would be the quickest way to get a general idea of the
Yeah.
number of units, so we know better what we're talking
Yeah,
about.
okay.
'Cause they
Bob?
said that they have a rapport with these platforms. They're willing to work with them as where they didn't used to be so willing, but now that regulations are starting to creep in, now they're a little more forthcoming.
Bob.
Bob Niscali, just, there is a good amount of information on the Cape Cod Commission website, and I suggest that maybe you reach out to the Cape Cod Commission as well with respect to some guidance maybe as to who might assist in putting together some of the data that you're looking for.
Good idea.
Very good idea, thank you. Yes, go ahead.
I'm Dave Garrison, and I'm the chair of the Affordable Housing Committee. While you're focusing on the enforcement side of this problem, I'd like to suggest that a separate track be considered, and this goes to the heart of Liz's work with her group, and that is to look at the question of how do we increase the number of long-term rentals. In other words, that's the objective. And to that, and I agree that in this town, we need to have more long-term rentals. They would be rented at market rates which would be much more attainable for the sorts of folks who need housing and want to stay in Falmouth. And that question doesn't fundamentally spin off of the enforcement issue. Liz's group has worked on this question of how can we incentivize some number of the existing short-term rentals in town to become long-term rentals, right? And you don't need to get to all 2,000 or 3,000 short-term rentals. That's not essential. I mean, even if the company that they've talked to was able to come in and incentivize, let's say, 200 or 300 new long-term rentals by incentivizing, which means you have to put some money on the table to make it worth the while of the individual to shift from short-term to long-term. Even if it was just a couple of hundred units, that in and of itself would be a huge step forward for our town, independent of the question of whether you can solve this very difficult problem of how to regulate short-term rentals. They're not the same question, in my view, and from at least speaking from the perspective of our committee, I would urge you to look at the question of the long-term rental objective and to see whether there's a way to use approaches of the sort that Liz and her group have found to advance that objective as a specific objective of the group's conversation.
I agree with you that it's an issue, but it's not the one that this group was formed actually to address. It could be a consequence
Understand,
of
but
our work.
you've got the folks in the room here who have the juice to be able to make that discussion move, and I would encourage you to do that.
It could be one of
Thank
our
you.
recommendations, but I think that's a separate select board action to take on that long-term, that's another whole thing to fund. Maybe some of the short-term rental would fund some of that, but I think that's why we did that legislation that you had recommended that we take up with the millionaire tax, the $1 million home tax. That's, okay.
Okay, I would like to say that our time is about up, and to look forward to, I'm sorry, our time is up, to look forward to our next meeting. First of all, a next meeting date, but before we get to the date, I think before the next meeting, I think what we'd want is, you seem to feel that we have not firm, but at least ballpark figures on numbers we should be thinking about of units. One, that would be good, but also to have an agenda that will focus us on the aspects that might be in the regulation, that would be the types of ownership, that would be the types of limits, that would be the, any kind of caps that would be, who would be responsible for enforcement, how would we do it? So we would know the sections that such a regulation probably would have. And we would look first at, are these the right sections? And then take them section by section instead of sort of a free-for-all going back and forth. I think we had a good, pretty thorough discussion today on the needs of registration, but even that's incomplete. So let's limit it to the areas that we would be regulating, which would be good. I want to thank you all for coming and for your interest in this topic. I'd like to emphasize again that we started the working group with the idea that we would be able to bring something to town meeting for action a year from now, by next April. And we'll continue to hope that that will be true, so that we know that it won't go on forever, just as a study, but we would have a recommendation and bring it to town meeting for either action or not. But in the meantime, we all see the news about this, and feed your information to Melinda, so we're working off the same information base. Jed?
If I may just plug the webpage just one more time. So for folks at home who are interested in learning more, follow the cursor. If you go to departments, click on planning. You can go to our current projects over here, short-term rental review, or just simply click on this little guy here. This is the all of the information relevant about this review process, the working group members, the scope and purpose of this group. Our second meeting will be recorded, or this meeting will be recorded. We'll post it on the on this page, and then there's some meeting packet information as well. So all of the material that was presented today is going to be hosted on the webpage. So we encourage people to let us know or click on it, review, and whatnot. And if you have any questions, you can either email myself or Melinda in the planning office.
And Jed,
or
while you're there,
suggestions.
what is the date of the last Tuesday in June?
So the last Tuesday in June, actually, there's a conflict with the Historical Commission. So likely this meeting will be June 18th, the next meeting of the short-term rental working group, June 18th.
At 4:30 in this room.
Yes.
Okay, closing remark. Did you want to say something, Doug?
No.
Oh, I thought you started.
I was just saying that not only questions, but comments could be sent to that email address as well. People have creative ideas of implementation.
Very good, thank you, and thank you for your interest. And thank you very much, all of you.
Motion to adjourn?
Oh, and a motion to adjourn. This, yes, second?
All in favor of adjourning?
Yeah. Adjourn. Right, thank you.